Fidel Castro isn't dead. He lives on in all of us, in all of our children. He lives on in the masses in Cuba and throughout Latin America and throughout the poor masses of the world. He lives on in South Africa, free because of the struggle of the people of South Africa and their allies, the most important of which was Cuba under the leadership of Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro lives on in the hopes and dreams of every poor person for a better life. In every single interview that I have done today, and I have done many, I have lost count of them, I have been relentlessly grilled about human rights. But as Fidel Castro himself said, we hear a lot of talk about human rights. But what about the rights of humanity? Why should some children walk barefoot while others are expensively clad and transported? Why should some live but 35 or 40 years while others live 80 or more? Why should some live lives of richness and variety while others live lives of grim and unrelenting poverty? That is a human rights question. It is a human rights question as to whether your child will survive its birth and infancy. Children born in Cuba, thanks to the Cuban Revolution, led by Fidel Castro, have a greater chance of life than the children born in Washington, D.C. Official. People who do survive their infancy will live a longer life in Cuba than they will in Washington, D.C. These too are human rights. Of course, there are restrictions on some political freedoms in Cuba. How could it be otherwise when Cuba has, throughout the entire existence of the revolution, been a country under siege, assailed, besieged and subverted, even to the point of foreign military invasion by its mighty neighbor only 90 miles away? Fidel Castro saw off 10 American presidents, each one of whom was dedicated to murdering him and destroying the revolutionary process. Hundreds upon hundreds of attempts were made to assassinate the president of Cuba, Fidel Castro. And the latest American president, the idiot savant Donald Trump, tweeted this morning that Fidel Castro was dead. Well, there are hundreds of millions of people in the world today who are mourning the passing of Fidel Castro. And there are hundreds of millions of people don't know whether to laugh or cry at the idea of the idiot Trump in his golden tower in New York being the so-called leader of the so-called free world. That's the truth of the matter. I could go on at very great length, and I will. I'm going to hold an event next weekend at which I shall give a fuller, longer tribute to Fidel Castro than I can today, so look out for that if you are interested. But someone just asked me from Associated Press outside, that was after 7 straight questions about human rights, what was the greatest legacy? Of course, I tried to tour the horizon of Cuba's achievements inside their own country, some of which I have alluded to already. But the greatest legacy is the internationalism of the Cuban Revolution. And Rob knows this well, as does Bob. The Cubans always thank you for the solidarity that we, in our own way, give to them. But the truth is, it's we who should be thanking them. Because the reason that the gold-toothed Scarfaces in Miami are dancing today are precisely the reasons why we are mourning. Before the Cuban Revolution, the mafia ruled Cuba. The mafia had bought and paid for the dictator of Cuba, Al Capone, Traficante, Mayor Lansky, all these criminal casino peddlers and brothel keepers had reduced Cuba to not just a state of penury and servitude, with actual apartheid in place against black people in Cuba. But for them, Cuba wasn't a country at all. It was just a kind of early Trump Towers, where the worst people in the world could exercise their lust and their vice. The Cuban people meant nothing to them. And Cuba was a byword for misery and for oppression. How different today from then. As I tried to explain to my young interviewer from Associated Press, Cuba is the coolest place on the planet. There are more people have been there or want to go there than anywhere else in the world. Certainly far more than want to go to Miami. Certainly a second time. Cuba has become famous throughout the world, not just for its own achievements, but for its internationalism. In Kashmir, when there was an earthquake, who were the first rescuers, the first engineers, the first constructors, the first doctors to enter the earthquake-stricken zone of Pakistan, a country with no ideological affinity with Cuba at all? You know the answer. The Cubans were the first. When Ebola struck West Africa and the Americans were sending troops to keep the stricken people at bay, the Cubans were sending doctors in their hundreds to move amongst the infected people to try to cure them. Who has cured killed more blind people on the earth than Cuba. What's that operation, Rob? Operation Miracle. Treating any and all and for free, giving them the gift of sight, which in many cases they had never had, without a penny changing hands, without any kind of political conditions. Even one of the murderers of Comandante Che Guevara had his sight restored in Operation Miracle. Who left their bones in Angola? Who left their bones in Grenada? Who left their bones in the Congo, in Vietnam, on the Golan Heights in Syria, where a brigade fought the Israeli army? The Cubans left their bones and their blood. There is no country on earth like Cuba, and it will be remembered, Trump, when you are long forgotten and in the dustbin of history. Long forgotten. So what happens now? Well, the ambassador, if she makes it back, will tell us. But I feel absolutely confident that the Cubans will never agree to return to the days before the Cuban Revolution. They will never re-inherit the emigres, the brothel keepers, the casino owners, and the mafia gangs that they defeated. I am absolutely confident. You know, on a clear day, you can see Haiti from Cuba, where the people are forced to live in a sink of misery, complete immiseration, robbed by a corrupt political class and their allies for decades. I close with one anecdote which I had forgotten that I used to use, but one of my friends reminded me today. One of our comrades, John Bevan, was traveling in a hired car in a very remote part of Cuba, and he saw two black women cane cutters with their machetes over their shoulders on a long walk home from the fields. He's a fluent Spanish speaker. He stopped to give them a lift. One of the women said, "It's wonderful that foreign visitors are coming now to these far-flung parts of Cuba. Mind you," she said, "many Cubans are traveling far afield now. My daughter," she said, daughter of a black woman cane cutter, "my daughter is abroad. She's a doctor working on an international mission. There is no other place, probably in the entire world, where the black daughter of a cane cutter is a doctor and is working for free for other people around the world." Viva Cuba! Long live Fidel Castro!
Thank you very much, George. It's always a great pleasure to hear you speak, and you've been a great supporter of the campaign for a number of years, and thank you for that.